Okay, let's start again. So this is my dad, LeRoy Miller. He's 80 years old, and today is May 26th, 2018. I almost said 19 something. So Dad, you started in the manufactured housing industry when?
Back in 1962.
And how'd you get into it?
I was lured into it by my brother-in-law, Roy Snell.
How can he lure you into a job?
How what?
How can he lure you into an industry like that?
Well, I had a card from the Lockwood Graders, from the Teamsters Union.
Oh.
I was a machinist and a welder there.
Uh-huh.
And they run on to slow times in the winter. So they gave us all a card, the ones that were left after the layoffs, to go to the sugar factory, which was also Teamsters.
And so the card would allow you to get on
Yeah.
and work at the sugar factory?
After the campaign at the sugar factory was over, we was to go back to Lockwood Graders and have our old job back. But my brother-in-law talked me into going out to this manufactured housing plant, Magnolia, because they were hiring. So I had a brother and two brother-in-laws out there, so I went out there to go to work.
Okay.
And my first job they gave me was working on the roof, cool sealing, which is coating the seams so they don't leak.
Oh.
And the cool seal is a product that you don't have to take out of the bucket. It jumps out of the bucket on your pants.
Seriously? What does that mean?
No.
Is it like tar?
No, it's just so messy that you just get it all over you. I don't care how careful you are, you get the... And we always said it jumped out of the bucket on you. You didn't even have to take it out. But anyway, you'd go home at night and your pants would be all full of cool seal. You'd ruin a good pants every day almost. Besides, we had guys on the ground floor that were working on the bottom part of the manufactured house, and they'd be putting on tin, and I'd said, geez, I was a machinist and a welder, and here these guys had better jobs than I did. No. So I just went and told him that that wasn't what I came there to do, and if that was going to be my job, I would go to sugar factory because I still had a couple of days left. And the superintendent came up and talked to me and told the lead man in that department where I was working that he needed to give me a better job, and he did. So I worked there for, I don't know how long it was before they came and asked me if I would be the group leader in the cabinet hanging department. So I did. And my brother-in-law, Roy, who talked me into coming out there, would build the cabinets, then I would hang them. And that went on for a few months, and pretty soon one day the guys in the final finish department was rebelling because of the wages or whatever. They had a grief, and they walked out. So the head guy had a meeting in the floor department, and he asked who wanted to go down to the final finish because he wasn't going to take them guys back. So I said, I'll go down there. So I went down. I was putting furnaces in, and we were final finishing the house, getting it ready to ship.
I have a question. So if these people walked off the job because they were union and were you crossing a picket line?
They weren't union, not at Magnolia.
Okay.
The sugar factory was union, but the trailer factory was not union.
Okay, thank you. I didn't understand that. Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, we finally got a few more guys to come out to fill out the crew. And I worked there for a while, and they asked me if I would be the group leader down there then. And we was putting out houses, quite a few of them a day. I think we was putting out 5 a day or something like that. But they were not built very well. Dealers were sending some of them back, and finally we had a big meeting in the floor department, and they said, the head guy says, I'm going to form 2 lines, a line A and line B. And of course, nobody knew what he was getting at, but he says, when I call your name, I'll tell you what line to get in. And so he went through that process until everybody was in either line A and line B. And when he got done with that, he said, line A, he said, you guys can come into the office. We're going to give you checks. You're done. And he said, line B, he said, you can go to work in your normal departments you were in, and then we'll come out and see how everything's lined up later today and do some adjustments if we have to.
Wow.
So he cut the crew almost in half.
Wow.
Then when he came out that afternoon, he got us together again, and he said, well, he says, what we're going to do for the rest of the day and maybe even the rest of the week is we're going to go out in the yard, divide up into crews. He said, we're going to go out in the yard and go through these houses we have in the yard, and we're going to fix them so that they'll go to the retailers and they won't want to be sending them back because we'll have them right.
Mm-hmm. Now, who was this person doing this?
His name was Doug Hawkins.
Mm-hmm.
He was the general manager. Probably a guy that I learned the most from, not only in the manufactured housing business, but in working.
Mm-hmm.
How to work, how to handle yourself. And he would take me in periodically and show me, talk to me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He was a very imposing guy. He'd been to college to be an attorney. His dad was a rich oil man down in Texas. And Doug had went to law school because his dad's idea was that he was going to take his son and make him a corporate lawyer for his company. Well, when Doug got through law school, he didn't want to be a corporate lawyer in the oil business. So he met up with the guy that had 9 factories, and they were Magnolia Homes. And one of them was in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, while the rest of them was all back down south around Mississippi and that. But anyway, Doug came up for him. His name was F.L. Cappert. He was a good friend to Bob Devaney, the Nebraska coach. And Cappert would come up and stand on the sidelines with Devaney because he was a big Nebraska fan. But anyway, Hawkins was sent up to, the factory was failing out here in Scottsbluff. I mean, it was kind of a comical thing to watch people go in and work. I mean, it was bad.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's why dealers were sending houses back.
Poor quality?
For quality. Quality was terrible. And that was one of the reasons Hawkins was sent up here in the first place. But he was quite a guy. He looked about he was almost a splitting image of Rock Hudson.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really handsome, huh?
Oh, yeah. Very good looking, very well spoken. I mean, very well spoken. I mean, you could go in mad on a deal, and he would sit down and talk to you. And when he got done, you would feel like you could walk out the door without opening it. You could go under. Yeah, he'd go. He had a real technique about talking to people.
So could he dress you down and you didn't realize what happened until you were out of the room?
He could dress you down without insulting you.
That's a gift.
I mean, he didn't insult you at all. That's why I say you felt like you could walk under the door. You'd say, God, I'm stupid. What did I do?
Mm-hmm.
What's the matter with me?
Mm-hmm. And you were kind of accountable then.
No. He was a really good guy, but he was one of the guys that told me, he said, when you're going through the plant, if you watch, he said, you come in, the guy punches in at the beginning of the, by the time clock, which is up by the front door.
Mm-hmm.
He said, and if he's got a job down on the other end, he said, he walks straight down there. He says he focuses on his point that he's gone to.
Mm-hmm.
He said, but let me give you a good piece of advice. He says, as you're going down there, he said, look on both sides as you're walking, because you'll see stuff that if you focus on where you're going only, he said, you miss everything else as you're going down. He says, and that's with everything in life. He says, as you go someplace, be aware of what's happening on both sides of you.
Mm-hmm.
He says, always focus on that. He said, and you'll be surprised how much you learn, how much you see that you would have missed if you just look where
Right.
you're going.
Wow.
So I learned a lot from him. He'd take me in periodically and give me some pointers. But one of the reasons he said he kind of focused on me was because I was always clean. I drove this big 57 Pontiac, and it was always shining. And I wore these engineer boots, black, and they were always shining.
I remember polishing those when I was
Yep.
little.
And he wanted to know why I do that. And I said, well, they'll last longer, and and they look better. And he just kind of smiled. And he told me one day, he said, that had a lot to do with why you was hired and how come we maneuvered you until we got you up to the top spot.
Mm-hmm.
He said, you had a lot of the qualities we need. He says, you got good leadership qualities if you use them.
Mm-hmm.
He said, so don't lose them.
Good advice. Good advice.
And then the second man in there that he brought with him was John Boatwright. And John Boatwright ended up to be a general manager later on. But he was a guy from Arkansas. And he ended up very high in the company. But he was a lot of help. He'd come out, and he ended up being a purchasing manager there for a long time. But he was a lot of help if he liked you. But they had a superintendent there, and then they decided they needed to have someone that would be a spokesman for the plant so that the people that worked there would know that they had a voice in what was going on. And every Monday morning, the first thing we did is he'd have a big meeting in the floor department, and they would go over what we didn't get done the week before and how we was going to change that and what we were going to get done this next week. And we was always focusing on how many houses we were to put out and where we had to be at certain points of the week, and go over who had problems, who couldn't make it, who needed help, all that kind of thing. But when they decided they needed someone to be a voice, he says, I want someone out there you guys want to be your voice. And they took a vote. They had a ballot box. Everybody got, I think it was a week to go around and look at people and talk to people. We kind of looked at who would be the best spokesman. And he said, now don't just pick your friends. He said, pick somebody that you know or feel is going to do the job for you, because it's going to be important to you that whoever brings your voice to the meetings, you get accomplished what you want to. So somehow I end up getting not somehow, they voted me in. That's
Mm-hmm.
I was given the job to be the second in command there. And coming from the farm, I had no experience at doing that.
Like attending meetings,
Nope.
speaking for yourself or speaking
Nope.
for others, representing people. So
And I had the same problem everybody else has, and then a lot of people, I guess, even actors and singers, and that they have the problem of getting in front of people and talking.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the first time, I guess, I talked to him, and when I got done, I sitting there and thinking, what did I say? I don't even remember what I said.
Mm-hmm.
But then people would come up and say, good talk, good talk.
Mm-hmm.
They'd say, how could I do a good talk when I don't remember what I said?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, everything went along for about, what was it, about a month and a half. And finally I came in one morning and we went to work, and finally called me over the loudspeaker to come into Doug Hawkins' office.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, oh God, I suppose I did something wrong. I'm going to get canned already.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're going to tell me I can't do the job. But anyway, I went in and they said, well, are you ready to take over the whole thing? And I said, what are you talking about? And they said, we want you to take over the whole line. And I said, what about, I think his name was Floyd. And they said, oh, he's gone.
What happened to Floyd?
They canned him.
Oh.
And I said, why? And he said, oh, he hadn't done the job for months. He said, he can't get it.
Mm-hmm.
He said he was the reason quality went down so bad. He said he just doesn't get on people, and and they override him and all that. And he said, instead of, if we're going to get the job done, we have to have somebody strong enough that, people can't push him around, because that's what people do, he said. They find your weak spot and they prey on it. And I said, well, how do you know they ain't going to find mine? He said, well, I don't know. I think we've talked to you enough, and we got a pretty good feel for what you're like. And he said, I don't think you have a lot of weak spots. He said, what you do have, we feel we can help you through. He said, always remember, we'll be here. We're behind you. He said, we're not just throwing you out there. He said, we want to make sure you can get the job done. So they gave it to me. And I went along for about 5 or 6 months, And I'd stay late and sit there, and I'd walk up and down the line looking to see what I could see that I had to do. But we had 14 departments, and there was a group leader in every department. But a lot of things like plumbing, electrical, stuff like that, I had never in my life done.
So what was your job title at this point?
They called it superintendent.
Oh, okay.
Instead of production manager, which it became later, all the factories called them production managers, because that's exactly what they did. They managed the production. But back then they called it superintendent, because the schools and that, the high-up guy was superintendent.
Okay, uh-huh.
So they kind of based it on that, I guess. But I went along trying to cope with all of it at the same time. And
But you said you were saying you didn't know a lot about plumbing and things like that. So what happened?
Well,
How did you manage those people?
it was tough.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and people have a way of, making you struggle more than you probably should, because they don't fall just in line and help you, a lot of them. You got some that do and some that don't. My problem was starting there at that young age. I had a lot of guys there were a lot of guys working there that had been there for 8 or 10 years. And there was a lot of guys there that was considerably older than I am. And some of them just flat out said, I ain't taking orders from no snot-nosed kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say, well, you don't have to. So, you punched in, punch back out.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what you want to do. It's yours. I said, but, I got a job to do, and if I don't do my job, I said, I'll be the guy punching out. I said, but if I leave this place, I guarantee I'm going to be looking at the back of your head, not you looking at me going. And pretty soon everybody kind of got the idea that it wasn't too easy to run this guy over. Some of them called me Little Hitler.
Mm-hmm.
But I run into the point where I said I feel guilty about going out and and getting on the electrician or the plumber or whoever, not knowing their job. So I went in and told them, I said, I just can't do that. I said, I'm not made that way. And they said, well, what do you suggest? I said, we got a truck on the road where a guy goes out and repairs all these houses. I said, and I've talked to him, and he's not going to do it very much longer. I said, I'm sure you guys already know that. And they said, yeah, he's talked to us. I said, well, I tell you what, I'll go on the road. And they said, you realize if you go on the road, we can't guarantee your job when you come back. And I said, well, that'll be my problem. So I took the truck and went on the road for almost a year. And I was out sometimes a month at a time. But out there, I learned how to do all that stuff.
The plumbing and the electrical.
Yeah, learned how the whole house was made. And I'd come back every once in a while and go out in the line and tell them some of the problems we was having and how we was building some stuff wrong and how I could see it should be, how I would change it out in the field to make the people satisfied with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we would come back and incorporate that into how we build them in the first place.
Ah.
And
so not only were you learning, but you were improving processes
Right.
back at the plant.
and in by the same token, it saved the company money because you didn't have to go out and redo the stuff the guys done in the plant.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, at the same time, I would keep track of which problems we was having the most of, and I would come back and talk to the guy that was in charge of the production and tell him, and those guys that we continued to have a problem with their stuff, finally weed them out,
Mm-hmm.
replace them, get another guy in there, and that way usually improving the production people. So, and I did that for a year. Then I came back in, and I guess I did a good enough job for them. They was pretty happy with it. They gave me half of the line. They told me, they said, we just can't, he's done a fairly decent job. We just can't take Bill, and it was Bill Boyer. Said, we just can't take him and kick him out now.
Why do I know that name?
So they said, we'll give you half the line and Bill half the line. And we've already talked to Bill, and he's satisfied with that. And it's a lot for him in the first place. There's a lot of work for one guy. Two guys should be able to do it better. And said, no, you guys have been working together the way it is. You coming back and telling him what's wrong and what you're finding and that kind of thing. So you guys have already got a history of working together. So I took half the line, and he took half the line, and how did it get to the? I'm trying to think of how long we went. Oh, we did that for probably a year,
Mm-hmm.
where the two of us was on the. And Bill came down and had, he got prostate cancer.
Hmm.
So he was off for a while. So I had the whole thing. And we started a house plant and hired a crew. Actually, the house plant originated from the big new welding shop we put in. And after we put the welding shop in, we decided we'd actually build a real nice place to build one house, build it all together and send it out instead of having half houses go down and assemble them. So we tried that. Double wides, great big double wides, that's what it was, the big double wides. The big expensive ones we built together in the house plant. And we had one crew out there, one guy that did plumbing every job.
So it wasn't assembly line style.
Nope. It was build it together,
like you would any other
Yeah.
stick-built home.
then take it apart.
What kind of building standards were you using then? Were you still building them like mobile homes? Or were you building them more like manufactured homes, like stick-built homes?
Well,
Was it still in between?
we were one of the very few factories that were building the houses with bigger, thicker floors. I mean, bigger floor joists and no frame, no steel frame under them.
Oh,
We had a dolly system that went under in the back for the axles and wheels, and then we had a hitch system in the front. But those were made so that when we got it to the dealer's lot, they blocked it up, and we brought the dolly system, and that came back.
oh,
The one would flip over on top of the other one, and
so were they not trailer houses anymore? Like they didn't have a trailer underneath?
they were like a Boise Cascade house. They were, what did they call them? Modulars.
Modulars,
They
okay.
called them modular homes. Yeah. And we built them for, well, he was still building them when I left. But anyway, Boyer came down and got sick. Well, then they had a big program where the best employee, the guy that done the best for all year, got a free trip to the Bahamas with his wife.
Mm-hmm.
And the production manager, one of them, got to go. Well, I was going to get to go.
Mm-hmm.
Me and your mother was going to go. And being Boyer had the prostate cancer, and it didn't look good for him surviving it, I decided to give him the trip.
Mm,
So he went in our place.
nice.
I laugh every once in a while. I said, and then after he took the trip, he didn't die.
Oh, God.
He lived on.
But you still did the right thing.
Yeah, I think I did. Would have liked seeing the Bahamas, but, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we improved a lot. I mean, our houses were Magnolia homes, yeah. They got to be one of the top plants out of the 9 that Cappert had, and he would send it. He had a big airplane. It was like a 737, but he had it all gutted, and he had coffee tables in with magnolias embedded in the top. But he would send his plane in there, and he would let us guys go out in, sit in his plane, and his pilots would be out there, but he would stock it with beer and goodies and stuff like that, kind of as a little treat for job well done.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd do that all during the Nebraska season, whenever they had a home game.
Mm-hmm.
He would send his plane to Scottsbluff. Let's see what happened. The division manager would come in, who was Roy Pegenkoff, and we got pretty well acquainted with him. The thing is, Roy Pegenkoff was from Kansas, and he was short and stocky, and if he turned around real fast, he looked exactly like my dad.
Seriously.
And one night, the night watchman called me and said, "Leroy, we've got a guy walking around in a plant." And I said, "Who is it?" And he said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "But he's walking around all over in the plant." And I went up and asked him who he was, and he said, "I'm Roy." He said, and he walked off on me. And he said, "Would you come out and see who that is?" So I went out, and I was walking around. I said, "Where is he?" And he said, "I don't know. He was just over." He said, "He went out back." So I went to the back door, the door that went out the back of the building to the place where we had material stocked in a little lean-to type thing in the back. And I reached for the door to open it, and the door opened, and he walked through. And I thought, right away it looked like my dad. I thought, oh! And I was standing there shocked, and he says, "Oh, excuse me." He said, "I didn't mean to scare you." And then I realized it was Roy Pegenkoff, the divisional manager.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we got talking, and finally he was talking about they were going to expand. And oh, the part I forgot though is that in the meantime, before all this happened, Gurdon Industries was going down. I mean, they were losing money, and they had, I don't remember how many, 40 some factories. I think 41 factories, yeah. And F.L. Cappert, who was the owner of Magnolia, bought them.
Oh.
So then Magnolia actually was 50 factories. And they kept the name Gurdon because it was a recognition thing. The more factories, the bigger name. And they had factories all over the country. They had them out here in Boise, Idaho, and all over. A lot of them in Kansas, a couple of them in Kansas.
Where was their home base?
Boise.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, it wasn't either. Well, Cappert was home base. They ended up being in Kentucky. That's where it was.
Louisville?
Louisville.
Okay.
Yeah. That's where they was home based for a while. But anyway, when Pegenkoff was looking for somebody, they was going to expand to build a factory in South Dakota for one of the dealers who had 52 retail lots. He was a big, big dealer. And he was taking his houses out of Newton, Kansas. And that was a long run from Newton to Madison. They was actually in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. So they find this little town in South Dakota, which was close to Sioux Falls and pretty close to all their 52 lots. But the big thing about it is they had a big meat packing plant there in Madison that closed down, and sent some of the people were traveling to Sioux Falls to keep their job, and so we came in and they talked to the people in Madison about building a factory. Well, they was all for it because they needed something there to be able to
have a workforce and employ people.
Yeah. So we went there, and of course, right away we got a.
So how did you find out about the job and who offered it to you?
They asked me what my plans were.
Oh.
And they said, "What about going to South Dakota?" I said, "We're going to build a new factory there, a brand new factory. What would you think about going up there?" And I said, "What would I be doing?" They said, "Well, you'd be the production manager up there." They said, "We have a good guy that we've run across that build frames for riblet products, and he's agreed to go up there, and we think you two would hit it off pretty good. That you got similar personalities, and so we're looking for somebody to go up there. And actually what you'll be there is you'll be there during the building of the factory and everything," they said. "Just be there from day one." So you get to go through and see the whole thing, help tool the factory up. And they said, "But we've got some new factories that like over in Oregon. We've got one in Woodburn, Oregon that been there a while, and it was in Forest Grove, Oregon." And they said, "We'd like to, and whoever goes there, we're going to send them out there and look at it and see what improvements they think should be done, because that's what we're trying to do. Is every time we build a factory, we'd like to make it a little better.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, and we've got a good guy from Boise, Idaho, that'll come out. He's an engineer, and he's worked with us for quite a while, and that was Jerry McDaniels. And they said, and we can get we've got another engineer, Craig Beal, said he's another engineer. And between those two guys and you, if you go, and we'll put the factory together, and you guys will work together to see which is the best way. And
Mm-hmm.
and they said, and then we'll, when it gets around to production time, when we get ready to open it, we'll bring in a guy from each department out of Scotts Bluff, or how many ever you think you need, and give you a hand on getting it up and running. And I said, that doesn't sound bad. And they said, it'll require you moving. I said, but we'll move you. We'll find you a house up there. We'll make sure that you got someplace to go. And he said, we'll take good care of you. And he said, and your wages, of course, will be considerably higher than they are here. He said, because it's a new factory startup. And he said, quite frankly, you're going to have a tough job. He said, you're going to have your hands full. So me and Jerry flew to Oregon, looked at the factory there, and came back and looked at all the blueprints, and we did some changing, and I had some ideas about some of the departments of where they stocked their supplies. Some of them, they was walking a long ways to get their supplies to get back to their working station. So we laid it out so every department had their supplies right behind them. I mean, they opened a door to the plant, and the lean-to was on the outside, and the supplies was right there.
Nice.
In other words, all the supplies was just behind the door.
Mm-hmm.
And we did that. And they said, why do you want it that way? I said, one thing for sure is that I can stand up in my office, and if I look and I see an electrician way over there, and I know all his supplies are back there, I said, he's out of station, and I want to know why.
Mm-hmm.
I said, that's the problem with a lot of these factories. People are milling around, and they've always got an excuse of why they're there. I said, if I've got all their stuff right there, they can. They've got no excuse.
No wasting time. And
I said, they're either messing around, they're out of station, period. That's it. I said, and I don't want them there. So that's the way we laid it out. That was our improvement to the factory there. And then we, of course, when they build them factories, they build them in the winter time so they don't lose any production time.
mm.
So we were up in South Dakota building this factory. We got the concrete, the floors all laid, and the walls gone up before the bad weather come in. But then we did get a lot of bad weather where it shut us down. But when they hired the crew to put the building up, they hired a lot of good people from Madison. So while they were on the days when they couldn't work, they had brought me at first I stayed in a motel there. The one motel was right outside of town, and I stayed there. But one morning I heard a bunch of commotion. I looked out, and people were running across the parking lot dragging their suitcases, and finally there was a knock on the door, and I opened the door up, and you could see the fire was going across the canopy out front.
What?
The guy hollered, "Hey, get out of there." He said, the motel's on fire.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So I grabbed my suitcase and I ran out. It wasn't too long. They couldn't save the motel. It burned down.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So then Gurdon brought me a little 8 wide house, 10 wide house, and they put it inside, and hooked it up with water and everything, and we let the front end we gave to the builders to put their blueprints and stuff, and I had the middle, the living room for working on my stuff, laying out the factory, and I worked with the people that put in the air stuff and all that kind of thing, and I bought all the tools and stuff to tool it up and everything we was going to need because I knew what every department needed. And so we got the tools, but while they were down, I would have them guys in talking to them about manufactured houses, and I'd show them blueprints and all kinds of things.
Because they'd never done that kind of work before?
No.
Okay,
So
so
they
you were
was all
training
pretty
them.
interested.
You were training.
Right. And I was picking guys out of the bunch, which one's the best, which ones would be the best leaders. I would go around, seem to get them isolated once in a while, talk to them and see what their plans were, what they wanted to do in the future, things like that, how many kids they had, get acquainted with them to know what their families were like, what they were like. And by the time that we actually went into production, I had a group leader for every department lined up, knew how to do his job because we went over it lots of times. So when they came to me and says, how many guys you need out of Scotts Bluff? And I said, I don't know. Do they need any down there? We might be able to help them. And they said, no, seriously. I said, no, seriously, I've got guys lined up for each and every job. And they said, okay. They said, if you need any help, just give us a holler. We'll get somebody up there right away. And they called me 3 or 4 times in Scotts Bluff, saying we ain't heard anything about sending anybody up. And I said, don't send anybody up unless they just want to come up to visit. I said, we're working up here. But when the smoke all clears, they had a plan laid out for us from corporate office of how many we were going to start with, and how many they wanted to get, and eventually how many we were supposed to get to in a certain period of time. But I've got some newspaper clippings that, when they put the story in the newspaper down there, that we actually, within the first year, we was a year and a half ahead of schedule.
Wow.
I mean, we were at the production in 1 year that they thought we'd be at in 2.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. We were building that many homes.
Good workforce?
Good workforce. You could take one of them guys from out any department and send them out and do welding, which you couldn't do in most factories. I mean, they could do anything. A lot of them were farm guys.
So they were cross-trained in a lot of different areas, had a lot of experience.
And we had a list of waiting list actually of people that there were a lot of people that come out there and check every day to find out if somebody was gonna quit or something. They see how they was, they wanted on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think the biggest problem we had when we got there, as far as employees were, is the townspeople. I had laid out a pay schedule and also an incentive program I wanted to put in, which was similar to the one we had in Scotts Bluff. That was laid out in relation to how many houses we built a day, and it was kind of a piecework thing. And the more houses, we had to build so many houses to break even, and the rest was, profit. So, and that's where they made their money. Well, when I presented it to the townspeople, of course, they had a big meeting and had me and Bill go down there. And
was this the Chamber of Commerce or townspeople? Who are the townspeople?
The retailers in town.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And the thing is, they come in and they said, you guys can't do that to us. And I said, what are we doing? And they said, you're setting your starting wage higher than what our wages are we're giving people. They said, you know, you're going to hire, we ain't going to have anybody.
Or people are going to expect more money when they work for them.
Yeah. So we backed off, and we started out at a lower rate than we wanted to go in. But I did tell them, I said, now look, down the road, and I had to set it back from when I'd originally planned to put it in. I said, down the road, we intend to put in an incentive program. It's kind of like a piece of work, and there was some people there that knew what I was talking about. And I said, the harder they work, you know, the more money they make. And they said, well, what about, you know, we're still going to lose people. I said, well, you know, you got to look at it this way. The more money those people make, the more of your product they're going to buy, or more of the stuff you're going to buy. I said, like, you got a clothing store. I said, they're going to buy more shirts. Mm-hmm. I said, besides that, they buy more shirts. They'll look better when they come to work for me. So they kind of went along with it and worked out pretty good. The average wage was about $2 an hour. Mm-hmm. And see, we was going to start them at $2.25. So we was going to start them at more money than they were paying. But what I didn't tell them is on that incentive program, lots of times they could, depending on what houses we were building, they could make as high as $5 an hour, mm-hmm. which, you know, they did. But it worked out real well. And it was one of the easiest jobs I had because you didn't have to go and tell people all the time what to do. They were ready to do it, and they were looking for better ways to do it. And they were, because they were so interested in their work, they were a lot more intelligent about their work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really, you didn't have to be there all the time gigging them on getting to work. They mm-hmm. were ready to work.
So talk about some of the people that work there.
Almost all the factories had a group leader in every department, which was probably an average of 14 group leaders that were working group leaders. In other words, they worked right with the people. They were just the lead worker. Most of those factories had the same thing, except most of them had 6 foremen. In other words, they had a guy over, depending on where in the factory it was, they had one guy over so many departments. In other words, 14 of them there were 6 guys over 14 departments divided down according to the way the work schedules were, or the workload was. But I didn't want any foreman because I wanted the guy that was giving the orders and showing the way right in there working with them. Because a foreman just gives you another guy to stand around. He's a supervisor, and to most people, supervisor means you just stand and watch. Mm-hmm. And somehow that always bothered me. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of places it was true. Right. You know, I'd come out lots of times and have to tell the supervisor well, that's after I got here in Mountain Home. I had to have foremen because they had foremen here when I got here. But up there, we didn't have foremen. Everything there was what I put in, and I had no foreman. Mm-hmm. I finally did relent to splitting the line in half and putting one guy in each end. One of the better. I gave the jobs to 2 of the best lead people. And that worked out pretty good. That was a good thing to keep communication back and forth. And then I had a gal her name was Peggy Vickmark, and she handed out all the tools and done actually the paperwork as far as time cards and stuff like that, and she's a sharp little gal. And she'd come up and clean the office and clean up my desk and keep things straightened out.
Oh.
Huh?
Hang on, we're going to take a break. Okay?